In the suffocating darkness of ancient tombs, beneath crumbling monasteries and forgotten crypts, lies a collection of texts so dangerous that the early Christian church would rather see them burned than preserved. These are not the gentle parables you learned in Sunday school, but the shadow scriptures that speak of blood rituals, fallen angels walking among mortals, and secret knowledge that could shake the foundations of faith itself. Welcome to the world of the Book of Shadows, where early Christianity reveals its most terrifying and forbidden face. For centuries, church authorities have worked tirelessly to bury these texts, to erase their very existence from history. But the shadows have a way of creeping back into the light, carrying with them secrets that were never meant for mortal eyes. What you are about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the origins of Christianity. Hidden within these lost texts are practices so dark, so blasphemous by Orthodox standards, that entire communities were slaughtered to keep them secret. Yet these very same texts may hold the key to understanding what Christianity truly was before it became what we know today. But beware, for knowledge comes with a price. Those who possessed these texts in ancient times often paid with their lives. The Church Fathers declared them heretical, demonic, and dangerous to the soul. They spoke of practices that involve communion with angels, rituals performed in darkness, and teachings that promised divine knowledge to those brave enough to seek it. Are you prepared to look into the abyss of lost Christian knowledge? To discover what the Church tried so desperately to hide? Then steel yourself, for we are about to enter the realm of shadows where early Christianity reveals its darkest secrets. Chapter 1. The Forbidden Gospels. Deep within the sands of Egypt, in 1945, a peasant farmer stumbled upon a discovery that would send shockwaves through the Christian world. Buried in a sealed jar near the town of Nag Hammadi were 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts that the church had tried to erase from existence. These were the Forbidden Gospels, the shadow scriptures that revealed a side of early Christianity so radical, so mystical, that Orthodox leaders had declared them the work of demons. Among these buried treasures was the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of 114 secret sayings attributed to Jesus himself. But these were not the comforting words of the canonical Gospels. These were dark mysteries, cryptic teachings that spoke of hidden knowledge, available only to the initiated. The very first saying sets the tone of terror and wonder. Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death. Death, it seems, was not the end for those who possessed this forbidden knowledge, but merely another veil to pierce. The Gospel of Thomas speaks of Jesus revealing secret mysteries to his twin brother, teachings so powerful that they could grant immortality to those who understood them. But understanding came at a terrible price, for the text warns that those who seek this knowledge unprepared will be consumed by it. The Gospel of Philip goes even darker, describing mystical unions between the living and the dead, rituals performed in bridal chambers where disciples would commune directly with divine forces. It speaks of sacraments involving not just bread and wine, but oil, water, and fire, each element designed to transform the participant into something beyond human. The text describes these ceremonies as taking place in darkness, away from the eyes of the uninitiated, where participants would experience visions of angels and receive direct revelation from supernatural beings. But perhaps most terrifying of all is the secret book of John, which reveals a cosmology so alien to traditional Christianity that it reads like something from another world entirely. This text describes how the material world was created not by God, but by a blind and ignorant demiurge named Yaldabaoth, a serpentine creature with the face of a lion who believed himself to be the only God. According to this forbidden gospel, the true God exists far beyond this false creator, and only through secret knowledge can the soul escape the prison of material existence. These texts speak of Sophia, the divine wisdom who fell from grace and whose tears form the material world. They tell of archons, malevolent rulers who guard the boundaries between worlds, seeking to keep human souls trapped in ignorance. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene portrays her not as a repentant sinner, but as Jesus' most advanced disciple, the one to whom he revealed his deepest mysteries about the nature of reality and the soul's journey after death. The Apocryphon of James describes Jesus returning after his resurrection to teach his disciples about the mysteries of suffering and death. In this forbidden text, Jesus reveals that his crucifixion was not a sacrifice for sin, but a demonstration of how the enlightened soul can transcend physical death through secret knowledge. He teaches them breathing techniques, meditation practices, and rituals designed to separate the soul from the body while still alive. These Gospels were not merely alternative versions of Christian doctrine, they were complete reimaginings of what it meant to follow Christ. They portrayed a Jesus who was not just a teacher and savior, but a revealer of cosmic mysteries, a guide who could lead the soul through the treacherous realms of death and into direct union with the divine source. The early church recognized the danger these texts represented. If Christianity was to become a unified religion with clear doctrines and hierarchical authority, these mystical texts, with their emphasis on direct revelation and personal gnosis, had to be eliminated. The Church Fathers declared them heretical, their authors demon-possessed, and their readers damned. But the shadows are patient, and truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how deep it is buried. Chapter 2. The Secret Rituals of Blood and Spirit. In the candlelit chambers beneath the streets of ancient Alexandria, Rome, and Antioch, early Christian communities gathered to perform rituals that would make your blood run cold. These were not the sanitized ceremonies of modern Christianity, but visceral, transformative experiences that sought to literally merge the human spirit with divine essence through practices that bordered on the occult. The most terrifying of these rituals was the bridal chamber ceremony, described in detail within the Gospel of Philip. This was not a wedding as we understand it, but a mystical union between the living participant and their divine double, their spiritual twin that existed in the realm of light. The ceremony took place in complete darkness, with participants entering a chamber draped in black cloth where they would lie motionless for hours, breathing in incense made from plants that induced visions and altered consciousness. During this ritual, participants reported experiencing what they called the sacred marriage, a union with their angelic counterpart that would free them from the cycle of death and rebirth. The Gospel of Philip describes this experience as so intense that many participants would emerge from the chamber claiming to have died and been reborn, their physical bodies marked with strange symbols that appeared spontaneously during the ritual. But even more disturbing were the baptismal rites practiced by certain Gnostic communities. Unlike the simple water baptism of Orthodox Christianity, these ceremonies involved multiple immersions, each one designed to strip away another layer of earthly attachment. The final baptism, reserved for the most advanced initiates, took place not in water, but in what the texts cryptically refer to as the blood of the Lamb mixed with sacred oil. The secret book of John describes elaborate initiation ceremonies where candidates would fast for weeks, consuming only bread and water while reciting incantations designed to weaken the hold of the archons over their souls. During the final initiation, participants would be led blindfolded through a series of chambers, each representing a different sphere of existence. In each chamber, they would encounter beings described as angels and demons who would test their knowledge and resolve. The most advanced initiates practiced what they called the ascent of the soul, a ritual death and resurrection performed while still alive. Participants would lie in specially constructed chambers designed to mimic tomb conditions, complete darkness and silence, while other initiates would perform ceremonies around their motionless bodies. The goal was to experience what happened after death while retaining the ability to return to physical life with knowledge of the spiritual realms. These communities also practiced forms of meditation that involved directly invoking spiritual beings. The Thunder Perfect Mind, one of the most mysterious texts from Nag Hammadi, appears to be an invocation ritual where practitioners would call upon a divine feminine force that claimed to embody all contradictions. The text describes her as both virgin and whore, mother and daughter, wisdom and foolishness, speaking in riddles that were meant to shatter the rational mind and open doorways to transcendent experience. Perhaps most shocking of all were the communal meals that replaced the simple bread and wine of Orthodox communion. The Gospel of Philip speaks of 5 sacraments, each involving different substances and producing different spiritual effects. Beyond the familiar bread and wine, there was oil for anointing, water for purification, and fire for transformation. The text suggests that the most sacred of these sacraments involved consuming substances that induced prophetic visions and direct communication with spiritual beings. The Pistis Sophia describes elaborate ritual dramas where community members would take on the roles of cosmic forces, acting out the fall and redemption of the divine wisdom. These ceremonies could last for days, with participants fasting and maintaining ritual purity while embodying archetypal energies. The text describes how these dramatic rituals would culminate in moments of collective revelation, where the entire community would receive visions of the true nature of reality. Some communities practiced what they called liturgical magic, ceremonies that combined Christian prayers with techniques borrowed from earlier mystery religions. The Greek magical papyri, though not specifically Christian, contain numerous examples of how early Christians adapted magical practices to their own spiritual goals. These included creating talismans inscribed with the names of Jesus and various angels, burning specific incense while reciting modified Christian prayers, and performing rituals timed to celestial events. The most secretive groups practiced rituals involving what they called living water, ceremonies performed in natural springs and rivers that were believed to be inhabited by spiritual beings. Participants would submerge themselves completely while reciting prayers and visualizations designed to merge their consciousness with the water spirits. These rituals often took place at night, under specific phases of the moon, and were said to grant participants the ability to see through the illusions of the material world. These were not the practices of a gentle, peaceful religion, but of spiritual communities that believed direct contact with divine forces required extreme measures and profound personal transformation. Chapter 3. The Fallen Angels and Their Earthly Disciples. In the shadow gospels of early Christianity lurks a terrifying truth that Orthodox doctrine has spent centuries trying to suppress. The fallen angels did not simply rebel and fall from grace. They established their own churches, recruited human disciples, and continue to influence Christian communities to this day. The Book of Enoch, revered by many early Christians but eventually banned by church authorities, reveals the horrifying extent of angelic corruption in the human world. According to these forbidden texts, the Watchers, a class of angels assigned to observe humanity, became obsessed with mortal women and abandoned their celestial posts to mate with them. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were not merely giants as Orthodox tradition suggests, but beings of terrible power who possessed both angelic knowledge and human ambition. But the corruption did not end with the flood. The angels themselves, though bound in darkness, found ways to continue their influence through human agents. The first book of Enoch describes how these fallen angels taught humanity forbidden arts that were never meant for mortal minds. Azazel revealed the secrets of metalworking and weapon making, turning human conflict into an art of systematic destruction. Semjaza taught the use of roots and plants for magical purposes, knowledge that would later form the foundation of both healing and poisoning arts. Most disturbing of all, Barakiel taught astrology, giving humans the ability to predict and manipulate fate itself. But their most insidious influence was in the realm of religion itself. The secret book of John reveals that the demiurge Yaldabaoth, the false creator of the material world, was served by a hierarchy of archons who established their own religious systems to keep human souls trapped in ignorance. These archonic religions masqueraded as legitimate spiritual paths while actually feeding off human devotion and keeping souls bound to the material realm. The Gospel of Judas, one of the most controversial texts ever discovered, presents Judas not as a betrayer but as Jesus' most trusted disciple, the only one who understood the true nature of his mission. In this forbidden gospel, Jesus reveals to Judas that the other disciples worship a false god, the demiurge who created the material world as a prison for divine sparks. Jesus tells Judas that by betraying his physical body to crucifixion, he will be helping to free the divine spark within him from its material prison. This text suggests that what mainstream Christianity considers salvation is actually a trap set by the demiurge to keep souls bound to cycles of death and rebirth. The true path to freedom requires rejecting the false god of this world and seeking the hidden God who exists beyond all material creation. Judas becomes the hero of this narrative, the one disciple brave enough to help Jesus accomplish his true mission of escape from the material realm. The Apocalypse of Peter describes in vivid detail how the archons established false churches that would masquerade as legitimate Christian communities. These demonic institutions would use Christian symbols and terminology while actually serving the forces of spiritual darkness. The text warns that many who consider themselves faithful Christians are actually unwitting servants of the fallen angels, their prayers and devotion feeding the very forces they believe they are opposing. Perhaps most chilling is the testimony of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which describes how the male disciples, led by Peter, rejected the revelations that Jesus shared with Mary because they could not accept that divine wisdom had been given to a woman. The text suggests that this rejection was not merely cultural prejudice but spiritual blindness induced by archonic influence. By suppressing the feminine aspect of divine wisdom, represented by Mary's teachings, the Orthodox Church was actually serving the interests of the demiurge, who sought to maintain a patriarchal system that would keep humanity spiritually imprisoned. The Pistis Sophia goes even further, describing how Sophia herself, the divine wisdom, became trapped in the lower realms through the deceptions of the archons. Her fall from grace mirrors humanity's spiritual predicament, and her eventual redemption provides the template for human salvation. But this salvation requires rejecting orthodox religious authority and seeking direct gnosis through personal revelation and mystical experience. These texts describe communities of initiates who claim direct contact with angelic beings, both fallen and faithful. The Thunder Perfect Mind speaks of a divine feminine entity who embodies paradox and contradiction, claiming to be both the source of wisdom and the cause of confusion. This entity teaches through riddles and apparent contradictions, forcing the seeker to transcend rational thought and achieve direct spiritual insight. The Book of Thomas the Contender describes Jesus' teaching his twin brother about the nature of the body as a prison and the material world as a realm of suffering created by ignorant powers. This text portrays the physical body not as God's creation but as a trap designed by malevolent forces to keep the divine spark imprisoned in matter. Liberation comes only through recognition of this truth and the cultivation of practices that gradually separate consciousness from physical attachment. The Gospel of Truth describes how the fallen powers create illusions of knowledge and truth to deceive spiritual seekers. It warns that most religious teaching, even that which appears to be Christian, is actually designed to keep souls trapped in cycles of ignorance and suffering. True gnosis comes not through study of texts or participation in religious ceremonies, but through direct revelation that bypasses the deceptive systems established by the archonic powers. These communities believed that the cosmic war between light and darkness was not some distant future event, but an ongoing reality playing out in every human soul and every religious community on earth. Chapter 4. The Church's War Against the Shadows. The smell of burning parchment filled the air as Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria stood before the great bonfire in the monastery courtyard. The year was 367, and the Church had finally decided that the Shadow Gospels posed too great a threat to Orthodox Christianity to be allowed to exist. What began as theological disagreement had escalated into spiritual warfare, with the very soul of Christianity hanging in the balance. The war against the shadow texts was not fought with words alone, but with fire, sword, and systematic persecution that would make the later Inquisition seem merciful by comparison. Church authorities recognized that these mystical communities, with their emphasis on direct revelation and personal gnosis, represented an existential threat to the hierarchical structure they were trying to establish. If every Christian could receive direct revelation from divine beings, what need would there be for bishops, priests, and papal authority? The first targets were the Gnostic communities of Egypt and Syria, whose elaborate initiation ceremonies and mystical practices had attracted thousands of followers. Church authorities declared these groups heretical and enlisted the support of Roman imperial power to crush them completely. Entire communities were rounded up in the middle of the night, their sacred texts confiscated and burned, their leaders executed or exiled to remote regions where they could spread no further influence. The Valentinian Christians, followers of the teacher Valentinus, who had nearly been elected Bishop of Rome, were among the most sophisticated of the Gnostic communities. Their elegant theology and advanced ritual practices had attracted members from the highest levels of Roman society, including senators, merchants, and even members of the imperial family. The Orthodox Church recognized that these communities could not be dismissed as ignorant or superstitious. They had to be actively destroyed before they could challenge Orthodox authority. The persecution began with theological debate, but quickly escalated to violence. Church historians like Epiphanius of Salamis wrote detailed accounts of Gnostic practices, portraying them as orgies of sexual depravity and demonic worship. These accounts, whether true or fabricated, provided justification for increasingly brutal suppression of mystical communities. Imperial decrees outlawed possession of Gnostic texts under penalty of death, and Christian bishops worked with Roman administrators to identify and eliminate Gnostic sympathizers. But the shadow communities proved more resilient than their persecutors expected. As open communities were destroyed, secret networks emerged to preserve the forbidden teachings. Monks in remote monasteries created hidden chambers where banned texts could be copied and preserved. Wealthy Christian families established private libraries where Gnostic Gospels were hidden among collections of Orthodox writings. Underground communities developed elaborate codes and symbolic languages that would allow them to recognize fellow believers without alerting Orthodox authorities. The most dangerous threat to Orthodox Christianity came from within its own ranks. Many priests and bishops had been exposed to Gnostic teachings and found them more spiritually satisfying than Orthodox doctrine. The Church Fathers wrote extensively about the problem of crypto-heretics, Orthodox Christians who secretly practiced Gnostic rituals and preserved banned texts while maintaining the appearance of conventional faith. Origen of Alexandria, one of the most influential early Christian theologians, was suspected of Gnostic sympathies because of his mystical interpretations of Scripture and his belief in pre-existent souls. Though never formally condemned as a heretic, his writings were scrutinized for evidence of forbidden teachings, and his influence on later Christian thought was carefully controlled. The case of Origen illustrated how the line between Orthodox and heretical Christianity was often unclear, even to church authorities themselves. The Council of Nicaea in 325 was as much about suppressing alternative Christianities as it was about establishing Orthodox doctrine. The bishops who gathered there were determined to create a unified Christianity that would support imperial authority and hierarchical church structure. The Nicene Creed was crafted not just to express Christian belief, but to exclude the mystical and Gnostic interpretations that threatened Orthodox control. The Arian controversy, which dominated Christian politics for centuries, was partly a continuation of the war against Gnostic influences. Arius and his followers taught that Christ was subordinate to the Father, a doctrine that echoed Gnostic teachings about divine hierarchies and emanations. The violent suppression of Arianism served as a warning to any who might be tempted to revive Gnostic theology under Orthodox cover. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945 marks the resurrection of the Shadow Gospels, but it also revealed the extent of what had been lost. For every text that survived, dozens more had been destroyed in the Church's systematic campaign of elimination. The voices of countless early Christian communities had been silenced, their spiritual insights erased from history, their alternative visions of what Christianity could have become buried beneath centuries of Orthodox domination. Today, as scholars piece together the fragments of early Christian diversity, we can begin to glimpse the spiritual war that shaped the religion we know today. The shadows are emerging from their long exile, carrying with them questions that Orthodox Christianity has never satisfactorily answered and truths that still possess the power to shake the foundations of faith.